Brian Smith was the kind of man who had the world at his feet. With a fortune accumulated through strategic investments in sectors like technology and real estate, his personal wealth easily surpassed millions. As the owner of one of the largest private equity firms in the United States, he specialized in identifying promising startups, turning small ideas into business giants. His ability to multiply money had made him a legend in the business world, and his lifestyle reflected that. Mansions, private jets, and a network of contacts that included CEOs and powerful politicians. However, while Brian could control the fate of his investments with surgical precision, there was one aspect of his life that seemed completely out of his hands. Despite all his financial success, the situation with his daughter Sarah was something he couldn't fix with money. After a tragic car accident, Sarah had lost the use of her legs. The doctors recommended a complicated spinal surgery that, if successful, brought hope for recovery. However, the road to recovery through physical therapy would be long and arduous, and Sarah wasn't willing to walk that path. One morning, while having coffee before heading to work, Brian tried to talk to Sarah. "Sweetheart, you have the best team taking care of you. Why not give it another try? They know what they're doing." Sarah, without looking directly at her father, replied in a soft, apathetic voice, "I know they're good, Dad, but I can't do it anymore. They treat everything like an obligation. I feel like a project, not a person." Those words pierced Brian's heart. He had done everything to ensure Sarah received the best treatment, but it seemed that all the money and effort were having no effect. Every visit to her room was marked by the same scene: her refusing physical therapy, pushing away the caregivers, and isolating herself more and more. Brian, who always had the answers to problems at work, now felt powerless. Before leaving for the office, he looked at Sarah once more, and with a voice full of concern said, "I just want you to get better, sweetheart. That's all." Sarah gave a faint smile, but her distant gaze showed the weight of her pain. Brian closed the door and left, unsure of what else he could do. The problem wasn't a lack of resources or qualified professionals, but something deeper. Sarah didn't feel understood, and that for Brian was something he still didn't know how to solve. The team of caregivers hired by Brian was the best money could buy. They had impeccable training, years of experience, and followed all medical protocols to the letter. However, Sarah, even surrounded by these professionals, showed no signs of improvement. She isolated herself, preferring silence over conversation. "Come on, Sarah, you need to do the exercises," one of the caregivers said, trying unsuccessfully to motivate her. Sarah, without even lifting her gaze, replied coldly, "It's no use. I've already told you I'm not going to get better." The physical therapy sessions seemed like torture for the girl. The mechanical movements and repetitive commands from the professionals only increased her frustration. "Once again, Sarah, try to lift your leg," the physical therapist said in an impersonal tone, while adjusting clipboards and monitoring the time. "I don't want to," Sarah screamed, throwing her pillow across the room with tears in her eyes. "They don't understand. It doesn't matter what I do. I'll never be who I was again." When Brian arrived home and saw his daughter in that state, he felt deep anguish. "Sarah, please, try. They're just trying to help you," he said, attempting to calm her. The coldness in the treatment made recovery feel even more distant. The caregivers followed their routines, but they couldn't truly reach Sarah. She didn't just need exercises or therapies. She needed someone who cared about her, who listened and motivated her in a more human way. Brian, although always present during critical moments, couldn't provide that emotional support. He knew something was missing, but he had no idea what to do. "I've tried everything," Brian said during a conversation with one of the doctors. "She's not responding to the treatments, and I feel like I'm losing my daughter to this despair." The doctor, with a serious expression, responded, "Her recovery doesn't depend solely on physical care, Mr. Smith. Maybe she needs more than what we can offer with traditional treatments." Those words echoed in Brian's mind, but he still didn't know how to solve this situation. All he wanted was to see his daughter back to her old self, but the paths he knew weren't working. That morning, Brian was in his office, surrounded by contracts and endless meetings. Although work kept him busy, his thoughts were always on Sarah. He knew she was at home, being cared for, but something was bothering him. During a break, he decided to do something he rarely did: access the house's security cameras. It was an occasional habit, more out of precaution than distrust. As he opened the footage, he expected to see the usual scene. Sarah in her room, isolated, perhaps looking out the window or in front of the TV, ignoring the caregivers. But what he saw was completely different. On the screen, Sarah was out of bed, standing, supported by someone's shoulder. Brian frowned and zoomed in on the camera. It was Miguel, the gardener, standing next to his daughter, holding her firmly. Immediately, Brian's heart raced. Who does Miguel think he is, being in my daughter's room? He thought, overwhelmed by a mix of fear and curiosity. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his car keys and left the office, not caring about the meetings he was leaving behind. When he arrived home, he rushed in through the front door. He quickly climbed the stairs, hearing laughter coming from Sarah's room. When he opened the door, he saw Miguel holding Sarah, helping her take another step. She was smiling, something Brian hadn't seen in months. "Sarah, what's going on here?" he asked, still out of breath. Sarah slowly turned, surprised by her father's sudden arrival. "Dad, I was trying to walk," she said with a shy smile, still leaning on Miguel. Brian, stunned, looked at Miguel with a questioning glance. "Miguel, what are you doing here? Why are you helping my daughter walk?" Miguel, remaining calm, gently let go of Sarah and responded humbly. "Mr. Smith, I know this may seem strange, but Sarah asked me for help. She was frustrated with the caregivers and felt like she wasn't being heard. I was a physical therapist before I became a gardener, and when she told me what she was going through, I offered my support." "Physical therapist?" Brian repeated, surprised. "You never told me that." "I didn't think it was relevant, sir. My job here is in the garden. But when I saw that Sarah needed something more, I couldn't just stand by." Sarah, still leaning against the wall, looked at her father and said sincerely, "Dad, he's really helping me. He understands me. He doesn't treat me like a burden." Brian looked at the two of them, unsure of what to say. The coldness of the caregivers, which he had already noticed, now seemed even more obvious. And there was Miguel, the gardener, doing what no one else could, bringing hope to his daughter. "I just want what's best for you, Sarah," Brian murmured, with a look of gratitude and relief that he still couldn't fully express in words. In that moment, Brian realized that perhaps the key to Sarah's recovery wasn't in the hands of highly qualified professionals, but in the genuine, human touch of someone who truly cared. Brian looked at Miguel and Sarah in disbelief. The revelation that the gardener was actually a former physical therapist left him both confused and curious. He stepped closer, still trying to process the situation. "Miguel, how did you go from being a physical therapist to a gardener?" Brian asked, his voice a mix of surprise and suspicion. Miguel took a step back, breathed deeply, and answered calmly. "Mr. Smith, I worked for many years as a physical therapist at a children's hospital. I helped kids with severe cases, like Sarah's, but after my wife became ill, I needed a job that gave me more flexibility. That's when I found the job here. Taking care of the garden allowed me to be closer to her during her final years." Silence filled the room for a moment. Brian, who had been ready to question Miguel's intentions, felt a tightness in his chest. He hadn't known the gardener had gone through such a painful loss. He looked at Sarah, whose eyes were shining, clearly moved by Miguel's story. "Dad," Sarah bowed, her voice more firm, "I asked for his help because I couldn't handle the caregivers anymore. They're good at what they do, but they don't understand me. They treat me like a patient, a responsibility. Miguel treats me like a friend." Brian looked at Miguel, still searching for the right words. "And how did you manage to get her to cooperate? She didn't want to even try with the other therapists." Miguel smiled slightly and looked at Sarah. "I just listened. Sometimes what these kids need is someone who hears them, who understands their fears and frustrations." Sarah didn't just need exercises, she needed patience, someone who believed in her at her own pace. And I knew that, in time, she'd be ready to try. Emotion filled Brian as he looked at his daughter. He saw something he hadn't seen in months, a spark of hope. And that spark had clearly been ignited by Miguel's patience and care. "Dad," Sarah said with a shy smile, "I'm going to make it, I feel it. But I want Miguel to help me. He gives me strength in a way the others can't." With a heavy heart, Brian realized his daughter was right. The coldness and distance from the caregivers weren't what she needed. Miguel, with his experience in humanity, had found the way to Sarah's heart and mind. Nodding, Brian finally spoke. "Then, Miguel, you keep helping my daughter. I trust you." Miguel smiled, grateful, and Sarah, for the first time in a long while, felt she was on the right path to recovery. What had seemed impossible was becoming real, thanks to a connection that no professional qualification had been able to establish. After talking with Brian, Miguel officially took on the responsibility of helping Sarah with her physical therapy. Every day he arrived early at the Smith family's house, always bringing his patience and dedication. Unlike other professionals, Miguel didn't follow a strict schedule. He adapted the exercises according to Sarah's mood and readiness. "Let's try something new today, Sarah. Remember that move we did yesterday? Let's take it a step further," Miguel would say in a calm and encouraging tone. Sarah, who once avoided any attempt at physical therapy, now showed a willingness to try. Though still struggling, she would respond with a timid smile. "Okay, Miguel, I trust you." With his help, she would stand up, pushing herself through each movement. The progress was slow but steady. With each step, Miguel would celebrate with Sarah. "Look at you, getting stronger every day. Just a little more, and soon you'll be walking around like you used to," he'd say, always encouraging her. In turn, Sarah started to believe in herself again. "I never thought I'd be able to get out of bed," Sarah confessed during one session, as she tried to stay on her feet with Miguel's assistance. "Now, I'm managing to take a few steps." Miguel, with his always understanding look, replied, "You've always had that strength inside you, Sarah. I just helped you find it." In addition to the exercises, Miguel would chat with Sarah about simple things, making the environment feel light and welcoming. "How was the end of that book you were reading?" Or, "Have you thought about which college you want to attend in the future?" he would ask, shifting the focus away from her physical limitations and bringing her back to the world she loved. These conversations made Sarah feel more comfortable and confident. She realized that Miguel saw her as a young woman full of potential, not just a patient with limitations. "Do you really think I'll be able to walk normally again?" Sarah asked, a mix of hope and fear in her voice. "I have no doubt," Miguel answered without hesitation. "But remember, the pace is yours. It doesn't matter how long it takes. What matters is that you're moving forward, and that's what counts." As the weeks passed, the small advances turned into significant achievements. Sarah began to move more easily, and the pain that had once been constant began to subside. For Brian, seeing his daughter standing and even taking steps on her own was almost miraculous. He often watched from a distance, unable to hide his tears of joy. "You're doing great, honey," Brian said proudly during one of the times he saw her walking down the hallway with Miguel's help. Sarah, with a sparkle in her eyes that had been absent for a long time, looked at her father and replied, "It's all thanks to Miguel. He never gave up on me." Sarah's recovery journey was far from easy, but with Miguel's patience and support, she finally began to believe it was possible. With every new step, her confidence returned, not just for her, but for the whole family. What once seemed impossible was now becoming a tangible reality. As the months passed, Sarah's progress became visible to everyone, but no one was more surprised than the doctors themselves. They closely monitored her, evaluating each new achievement with a mix of awe and admiration. At the latest appointment, the lead doctor, Dr. Robertson, looked at the recent tests and then watched Sarah walking with Miguel's assistance. He shook his head in disbelief. "I don't know how to describe what I'm seeing here. Sarah, your progress is unbelievable." Sarah smiled shyly, still leaning slightly on Miguel, but much more confident now. "I didn't believe it was possible, doctor, but with Miguel's help, I made it." Brian, who was standing next to his daughter, watched the scene with a mixture of pride and emotion. He still remembered the first few weeks after the accident, when the outlook was far from optimistic. "You said the chances of her walking again were slim," Brian said, looking at the doctor with relief in his eyes. Dr. Robertson nodded. "Yes, I remember. The damage to her spine was severe, and honestly, I never thought we'd reach this point. But clearly the work Miguel did here was extraordinary." Miguel, always humble, smiled discreetly. "I just believed in her, doctor. Sarah had the strength to recover. She just needed some support and time." "You have a special gift, Miguel," Dr. Robertson said, still in awe. "It seems like you can see beyond what the tests show." Brian moved, looked at his daughter and Miguel. "You two have done the impossible. Sarah, you're a warrior, and Miguel, I don't have words to thank you enough." Sarah, sitting in the chair after the effort of walking, looked at her father with determined eyes. "Dad, you have no idea how I feel right now." Before I thought I would never walk again, that my life was over. But now, I know I can go further. And it's all thanks to Miguel. The doctor ended the consultation with one last word of encouragement. Sarah, if you keep progressing like this, I think you might not need Miguel's support much longer. Your recovery is far beyond what we imagined. Those words brought tears to Brian's eyes. The impossible was happening before him. He saw his daughter, once hopeless, now almost independent, defying all expectations. As they left the office, Sarah looked at her father with a confident smile. Dad, I'm going to walk fully again. You'll see. Brian, his heart full of gratitude, replied, I already see it, my daughter, and you're going to do so much more than that. Inspired by the confidence of those around her, Sarah knew her fight was not over, but the most important thing was that she was no longer alone. Over time, Sarah achieved what once seemed impossible. She was walking again, completely on her own. Each step she took represented more than just a physical achievement. It was a display of emotional strength, resilience, and a renewed hope for everyone who had followed her journey. The smile that had disappeared for months had returned, and the sparkle in her eyes showed that the old Sarah, full of life and dreams, was back. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the mansion's garden in a golden light, Brian decided it was time to thank Miguel in a meaningful way. He stepped out of the house, taking a deep breath, watching the gardener who, once again, was there trimming the plants as he did every day. The same man who had, so discreetly, transformed his daughter's life. Miguel, Brian called, approaching with a serious but warm expression. I need to talk to you. Miguel stopped what he was doing and looked at him with his usual calm demeanor. Of course, Mr. Smith. Is there something wrong with the garden? Brian let out a light laugh, shaking his head. No. The garden is perfect, as always. But what you've done here goes far beyond that. He took a deep breath before continuing. I want to thank you, Miguel. What you did for Sarah. I can never express how much it means to me. You gave her a new life. Miguel, always humble, smiled softly. Sir, it was Sarah's strength that did that. She always had that determination inside her. I was just there to help. Brian shook his head. It's more than that, Miguel. The doctor said she would never walk like this again. All the professional therapists either gave up or couldn't really reach her. But you did something none of them could. You restored her confidence, and for that, I am forever grateful. Brian pulled an envelope from his pocket, containing a substantial amount of money. I want you to accept this as a token of my gratitude. I know money can't replace what you did, but I hope it shows how thankful I am. Miguel looked at the envelope, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Smith, I didn't do this for a reward. For me, the most important thing was seeing Sarah overcome her challenges. That's more than enough for me. Brian smiled, admiring the gardener's simplicity. I knew you'd say that, but I still want you to accept it. And more than that, I have something else to offer you. He paused, watching Miguel's reaction. I'm opening a rehabilitation clinic specializing in difficult cases like Sarah's, and I'd like you to be part of the team. Your talent and gift go far beyond what any diploma can teach. You have the ability to change lives, Miguel. Miguel stood in silence for a moment, visibly moved by the offer. He looked down, reflecting. Sir, this is an incredible opportunity. I've always wanted to keep helping people, but I never imagined I could do it in such a meaningful way. I accept with great honor. As they talked, Sarah appeared in the garden, now walking firmly, without any aid. Her steps, once uncertain and fearful, were now confident and full of life. She approached the two, overhearing the end of their conversation. I heard what you guys were talking about, she said with a playful smile. Miguel, you can't say no. You have to keep helping people like you helped me. Miguel smiled back, emotional at seeing Sarah's complete transformation. Sarah hugged him tightly, holding back tears. You changed my life, Miguel, and I know you can do that for many others too. Brian, watching the scene, felt his heart swell with gratitude. He knew that the impossible had become a reality thanks to Miguel's dedication and kindness. It wasn't just a physical recovery, it was a complete transformation in his daughter's life. You will always have a place in our family, Miguel, Brian said emotionally. I will never forget what you've done for us. Miguel humbly nodded. I am grateful for the opportunity, and now it's time to keep helping more people. And so, with a bright future ahead of them, Sarah, Miguel, and Brian moved forward, now bound by an experience that had transformed their lives. Sarah was ready to start anew, and Miguel, with his talent and empathy, was prepared to bring hope to many others. What seemed impossible at first had become a reality of healing, growth, and a new hope that would guide them forever. As time went by, life in the Smith household was never the same again, but this time in a positive way. Sarah, now fully recovered, walked around the house with the confidence and joy Brian feared he might never see again. The cane, once a constant companion, now rested forgotten in a corner of the bedroom. She didn't need it anymore. One morning, as they were having coffee on the porch, Sarah looked out at the horizon and, with a smile, commented, "I never imagined I'd be here today. Walking, feeling like myself again. Sometimes it feels like a dream." Brian, sitting next to her, gave a soft, relieved laugh. "It's been a tough journey, Sarah, but you proved to everyone, and most importantly to yourself, that you're stronger than any obstacle." Sarah smiled, still with the vivid memory of all the hardships, but now with the certainty that she had overcome them all. At that moment, Miguel approached as usual, his hands dirty from a morning of work in the garden. "Good morning, Mr. Smith, Sarah," he greeted with his always humble smile. Sarah stood up and walked over to him, hugging him warmly. "Good morning, Miguel. Did you know that today I'm going to take a walk to the park? The first one since the accident." Miguel, clearly moved, smiled. "That's wonderful, Sarah. I knew this day would come. You've earned it," she laughed. "You taught me to be patient, and now I can enjoy every step without rushing." As the three of them talked, Brian realized how much their lives had changed since Miguel became part of that journey. Not just Sarah's physical recovery, but the emotional and spiritual impact he had brought. Brian had always believed in the power of money and influence to solve problems. But Miguel had shown him that some things cannot be bought. They are earned with patience, humanity, and above all, kindness. "You'll be at the park with me today, right, Miguel? After everything we've been through, you can't miss this moment." Miguel smiled. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." And so they set off together for the park, as friends, as family. Life had returned to normal in a new way, richer and more complete. Sarah not only regained her mobility, but also her joy, her confidence, and a deeper connection to the world around her. The impact of Miguel, the gardener who had become so much more, would be felt by everyone in that house forever. Brian now knew that true success wasn't just in closed deals or numbers in a bank account, but in recognizing the value of the people around you, and how kindness, patience, and human care can transform lives in ways he had never imagined. When they arrived at the park, Sarah took her first steps alone, without anyone's help, walking firmly, with the wind gently blowing on her face. Miguel and Brian watched her closely, but without interfering. She was free, and as she walked, Sarah smiled to herself, knowing that this was the beginning of a new phase, a phase full of possibilities, all thanks to the strength she found within herself, with the help of an unexpected friend. Brian, emotional, looked at Miguel and said, "Thank you again for everything." Miguel responded with his characteristic smile. And so they all walked together, eyes set on the future, with hearts full of gratitude and hope. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories like this one, we have prepared the next video just for you. Click here to watch.